Do you believe the Bible is still alive? Do you believe that angels are actually active? Do you believe that the spirit realm is as real or even more real in the physical realm? Well, we're going to be having a wild journey today. I know it's Christmas and it's a spiritual time to think about the deliverance of planet Earth by the invasion of Jesus into our system. But what about those of us that go into the underground all over the world, into communist countries, into totalitarian structures where the gospel is not welcome? That's probably where the great works of the Lord are seen and witnessed the most. That's today's broadcast, something you don't normally hear. From the front lines, what's going on in the world out there that we never talk about on the news because it's underground work. Now, I have a gift for you, though, for your generous gift of any amount. This month, Next Level Warfare is available to you. LanceWallnau.com/next level. Find out how to deal with the devil at the level that you're at right now, a new level. Call 1-800-910-6349. And like I said, for your generous gift of any amount, you can make a massive difference in the lives of other people through this broadcast. And I love sowing into you. Let's get into today's special on Jesus invading the darkest places of planet Earth. Back by popular demand, we have Leland, Paris, and Paul Snyder here talking about real frontline warfare stories of God's commandos that are behind enemy lines, working in dangerous, persecuted countries, places where you go in and you may not get out. And we live a life of relative ease here, complaining about censorship. Well, in these other countries, you could actually just be locked up. Youth with a Mission is famous for some. Maybe many of you don't know about this, but the Leland Paris here helped to design the DTS. I always heard business people talk about the DTS. I never thought they were talking about, but they went through it, discipleship training. Many of them went through the training, went on into their careers, right? They did a period of time at Youth with a Mission. But it started in 1974, about the year I got saved, now that I think about it. Impacted over 1 million students worldwide. You guys have traveled over 140 nations. You got Mercy Ships International for over 30 years. But what's particularly interesting is your focus on the restricted nations. The Bible says, that darkness covers the earth, but the Lord rises upon you. Are you seeing? We always talk about moves of God and revival, but I know that there are testimonies that aren't as visible as they should be of God's faithfulness to you guys, Youth with a Mission, and now your enterprise, which is Global Bridges, I want to talk to you about, which is in these persecuted countries, in these restricted countries, you call them, training leaders in these restricted regions and actually taking care of orphans and providing food. You're doing a lot of the church's work, and I'm wondering, what are the stories that go with that? You've got orphans, you've got women, you've got people that are locked up in prison. I heard, I've been tracking this on CBN, China's cracking down on a lot of pastors. There's dozens of them getting locked up. This is an ominous thing. It's happening while Trump is president, which is interesting, because Trump's very vocal about what's happening in Nigeria. And he says, we don't like to see this happen to our Christian people. So there's this danger on the horizon, and we ought to take very seriously every opportunity we have now to get into these places and put roots down. So just tell me what's happening.
Well, even South Korea, which is a free nation that patterned after a lot of America's, they've looked up to us as heroes over the years. They're now locking up pastors as well.
I just heard that.
Yes,
they locked up a pastor. And this is a guy that hosted Charlie Kirk.
Yeah.
You talk about being tone deaf to American political sentiment. After Kirk gets assassinated, they lock up the pastor that helped to host the meeting of Charlie Kirk there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think it's a interesting dynamic taking place worldwide right now. I've never seen so much chaos and anger and hostility, and Christians are the brunt of the of the target right now, aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
Well, Jews also, they're getting their hands full.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Anti-Semitism, and they're shooting at the Hanukkah rallies.
Yeah, but I think it's not the time to fear. It's the time to just wake up and and study the Word of the Lord and follow what He's telling us to do. And I think as far as my personal testimony concerns, it's my family background. I owe a lot to my parents and my grandparents because my grandfather, who had rebelled against God for a lot of years, his brother became a Presbyterian pastor for over 50 years at Blood Church. And in fact, his granddaughter was Carolyn Sunseth, who was the Religious Affairs Department leader in Ronald Reagan's administration. And so she would call herself a shirt-tailed cousin of us. But his brother, my grandfather, rebelled against God, but then finally his wife had given her heart to the Lord. This is Oklahoma. And so she at one point in the breakfast table said, his name was Rufus. Rufus, would you mind asking the blessing for the food? He got up from his chair, from his table, knelt down and started weeping.
Oh, wow.
And my mother says, we never had breakfast that morning. He wept for over two hours, repenting to the Lord.
Oh, my gosh.
And then he goes outside and saddles his horse and starts riding from one neighbor to another, the farms, saying, you need to get saved. You need to give your heart to the Lord. And then soon after he sold his farm, got a covered wagon, and they started traveling across western Oklahoma, West Texas, many towns in Texas and Oklahoma. I drive with my mother through there years ago, back in the 80s, I guess, and before she had passed away. She said, well, we started the church in this town. Well, we started the church in this town. So they'd go from one town to another, and then the older kids would walk in front of the wagon, and the younger kids would ride in the wagon with the mother, and the father would be out there walking with the mules. And so they'd pick cotton to make ends meet, to keep their, bodies functioning. And they'd go to that town the Lord told them to go to, and they'd start street services, and then they'd go Brush Arbor, and then they'd start building it.
What does Brush Arbor mean?
Well, it's like poles and put tree limbs over it.
Oh, it's like a Feast of Tabernacles.
Yeah.
Just create a little shed.
And so they'd start preaching the gospel, and then they'd call in a pastor. They'd set up a church, and they'd go to the next town.
Twyla wrote a song about it.
So that was our,
Twyla who?
Twyla Paris. She wrote a song about it called 70 Years Ago that was a hit song back in, I think, 1994.
Yeah, I remember Twyla Paris. Family?
That's my niece. Yeah.
Oh, my God.
My sister.
Family's all over the place here. Okay, I know Twyla
Yeah,
Paris.
70 years ago, my father's mother's father, she said. So she sang it for my mother one time, this little humor. And my mother's one of those kind of person, didn't have much humor, but she was she wanted to tell the truth on it,
Yeah.
So she was sitting there. She said, I want to play this for you, Grandma, and see what you think.
Aw.
So she said, 70 years ago, my father's mother's father, And so, what do you think of it? My mother said, it wasn't 70, it was 76 years ago. She said,
Oh, my
well,
gosh.
it rhymes better this way. She said, never mind rhyming, tell the truth.
Oh, my gosh. Well, every year you have to change the lyrics. 77 years ago.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, I just want to say something for parents out there. Two things. I'm serious. Listen to me. These are gifts today for you. Christmas. This is a gift. Let your children overhear you talking positively about them and act as though like they're in the room. Because here's the way a child is. When you bring their name up, their ears get really like rabbits. They're listening. And talk about the characteristics you most enjoy about them. Let those thoughts go into them. Because I've learned that children internalize the judgments of their parents, and they can be wounded by the negative, but this is a time of the year when you can plant godly identity into them. Secondly, tell stories that give your family a legacy, because the story you're giving, it's an oral tradition. That oral tradition goes from you then to the next generation, and they can say, well, our great-grandfathers on my uncle's side, they pioneered the gospel going out into all these cities.
Yeah.
You need stories of your family's faith journey.
Yeah.
And I did an interview here with David Green. Perhaps we could figure out how to get some of these projects in front of them, because they sow, they get $8 billion a year business, and they sow half of that wealth away into Kingdom Enterprise. Beautiful family philosophy.
Thank God for the Bible Museum.
And the Bible Museum, right? And I said to David, so how did you instill this into your children and your children's children? He said, it's very important. The stories are how we got here. We always remind them where we began and what God told us. Youth with a Mission is a story is a story, an oral tradition. But then he said this, when it comes to giving, we have an annual meeting, and we discuss with them where we're going to invest what God's given us. And we all pray and discuss the projects, the people, the ministries, the enterprises. Now, they bring up ideas, so they're also looking for worthy places. So we're training them to see with kingdom eyes to sow. But it's so funny. It's like a corporation. But here, the senior leadership, which is actually running the organization, we make the final decisions. It's like, so in a sense, it's participatory. It's everyone has a say, but the decision-making is the elders. They're going to decide what they're going to do. But I thought, they're all meeting to discuss the giving.
Yeah.
And so if you got a family and you tithe, if you got a business, what a great legacy. Tithe off your business. Hey, you might want to tithe into these people here, the ministry they've got. Tithe off the business, and every year have a discussion with your family about what they're doing to feed the hungry, to reach the persecuted church, to raise up bold witnesses behind the scenes. Who said you're supposed to be comfortable with your capacity? God didn't say, are you comfortable? He's actually there as the comforter. Why do you think the Holy Ghost is called the comforter? Because of how uncomfortable you're going to get when you start flowing in that which God has for you.
Lance Wallnau has spent decades teaching believers how to recognize spiritual battles most people never see. Because some resistance doesn't come from what you did wrong. It comes from what was never dealt with. Patterns that repeat and struggles that feel heavier than they should be. Pressure that seems to come from nowhere. Next Level Spiritual Warfare confronts the unseen forces that operate through bloodlines, agreements, and spiritual doors, and shows you how to shut them down.
Next Level Spiritual Warfare. The spiritual warfare that's going to be in your own mind saying, I can't do this, I can't do that, how am I going to do it? Because we're going up, we're going to deal with another level. Hear more accurately, and God will add more and more revelation to plunder your strong man's house.
This teaching was created to help you recognize what you're really fighting and to activate the spiritual authority to break it. You can receive the full message from Lance Wallnau today for your generous gift of any amount at lancewallnau.com/next level or by calling 800-910-6349. Take the next step in shutting down resistance and stepping fully into what God has prepared for you.
I've got a video clip here I want to play, and then I'm going to turn around and ask you guys for testimonies of what you've seen from God in your life. Those of you that are watching by video, you'll see the words. I'm going to read it, though, for those that are in a podcast, because they're going to hear 1 minute of music and not know what in the heck we're doing. So go ahead and play it, and I'm going to read what it says. This is what Global Bridges is doing. Hope isn't just a feeling. It's actually a rescue mission, and it goes where food is scarce and clean water is uncertain, where faith can't be freely expressed, where children pray for rescue. Through this organization called Global Bridges, your support reaches where others can't go. You bring compassion. You bring purpose-filled education, tangible hope. Since 1998, nearly 119 million meals have been provided, rescue and care for more than 700 orphans, and much more. Mainly in the most restricted nations on the earth. Together, we rescue, restore, and raise up leaders. Be the bridge. globalbridgesrelief.org. When you think of God's faithfulness, tell me some stories that come to mind. How do you, do you have any secret sauce for how the money comes to feed this, sustain this thing, or what? Are you like George Mueller? You pray and believe God and somehow the money comes? Or how does this work, Leland?
Well, one of the amazing things is that people who just hear the stories and have actually traveled with us and been to see the work, they end up giving a lot of times. Not everybody can go, and right now there are nations that we can't get into and we can't take people into. We've got locals there that we're working with, but we can't go ourselves and anymore, and that's kind of a temporary thing, I hope. But
how do the I don't want to. You have to. You can't reveal sources and confidential information. That's what makes my interviews so awkward sometimes. But having compassion, which is dealing with orphans, providing food, clothing, etc., it has to open doors for the gospel, because you're not just. It's like I'm always telling my wife. She has this ministry. She's got this heart of a missionary, but she's furnishing families in Texas, 1,000 under-resourced single mothers. She's furnished their entire apartments by faith. She's got warehouses where stuff comes through. And I started saying to her, I said, honey, we got to get people saved, got to get their kids saved. We're just, because she's thinking like a mom. They don't have furniture. They don't have beds. So now we're focusing more intentionally, apostolically, I'd say, on it's not just the charitable deeds, but the good work is what reveals Jesus. I don't want to do just charity. I want to do the works that reveal Jesus. So we're even getting more granular on how do we reach them with the gospel and get their children. I'm basically looking at the 11 to 13-year-old males. They're the most at risk of going to prison, dropping out of school, and getting involved with drugs and gangs. So the young men, I want to pull them out. But so you got a lot of good charitable deeds you're doing, but how does God turn that into the gospel? How do you end up advancing the kingdom versus becoming a welfare system?
Well, I think it needs to start with the kingdom of God in mind. Everything we do needs to start with Him, and we need to take time to pause to say, Lord, what do you want me to do? And let it be built that way. And I think some of my memories as far as stories goes back to Duncan Campbell. I had the privilege of meeting that man less than 2 years before he died. And he was reminiscing about the revival that took place in the Hebrides Islands in 1950. Telling me the story. And he was one of those kind of men, Lance, that you hesitated to talk to because you were afraid you were going to interfere in the conversation he and the Lord were having at all times. Because he was that close to God. But here this wonderful Reformed Presbyterian pastor from Scotland had been used greatly of God in bringing that Hebrides revival. And so he starts telling the stories about how that the Lord directed him. And so I think what made a major impact in some of my earlier life was taking the time to pause and say, Lord, give me an answer, and let me go to your word. Let me hear what you're trying to say to me, because God does speak to us if we will follow Him and search for Him carefully. I think He's wanting to talk to us, and so I think we need to pause. But we get in such a rush sometimes that we're going faster than what God's wanting us to do. Sometimes we need to slow down enough to really get impacted by the Spirit of the Lord, to where when we do speak, there's major things that happens as a result. Right. Now, I don't want to take the time to tell that whole story.
No, that was an important story. By the way, the Hebridean revival is where Donald Trump's aunts were touched by the revival in the Hebrides, and that was what got his mother saved. So that the Bible that influenced him is she made Fred Trump go to church, and she made him go to the Billy. Mom was the one that gave him the Bible, not the dad, and go to the Billy Graham crusade. Yeah. She kind of made Fred and the boys and girls toe the line, and even then they were a little raucous. Yeah. But it was the Hebridean revival that touched Donald Trump's bloodline.
The two little old maid ladies, they're in their 80s, were too frail to go to church, but they were having prayer meetings in their house. And they said, Lord, send us a revival to our little nation here, our little country, our province, like we've read about in history. And so they'd have these prayer meetings. And then eventually there was a deacon in a church in the Lewis area that went behind his barn, knelt down and said, Lord, I'm not going to leave this until you tell me what I must do in order for revival to come. Duncan Campbell was down in England, ready to speak at a Hebrides conference at a conference. I forget the name
Keswick.
of it. The Keswick conference. Yeah. Right. And there was several thousand people out there. He was on the platform, and he said the Lord spoke to him, saying, "You're to leave right now. You're not to speak." He turned to the chairman and said, "Sir, the Lord just told me I'm to get up and go to the Hebrides Islands." The man said, "You can't do that. These people are waiting to hear you." He said, "Well, if you don't let me go, I won't do you any good. I won't do them any good. I won't do myself any good. I certainly won't do the kingdom of God good. So you need to let me go." So he stepped off the platform. The guy said, "Okay." And they said a mighty revival took place during that Hebrides or that Kezi conference as well. And God took care of that. But he got on a train, and when he packed his suitcase, he just barely made it to the train that went all the way to the coastal city, where a boat was loading up that goes once a week to the Hebrides Islands.
Oh my gosh! If he had waited a day, he would have missed a week.
And had he spoken, he would have missed the revival. And so he got on that boat. He got off in Lewis, and on the dock, a little boy was playing there, watching the boat come in. He said, "Son, would you mind going to the pastor and telling him Duncan Campbell has arrived?" The little boy says, "We don't have a pastor here. He left 6 months ago." He said, "Well, do you have a deacon?" He said, "Yes." So, and he lives right over there. So would you mind going over there and telling him? Well, so the little boy ran up there, and pretty soon he came back and said, "Yes, they're expecting you. They've announced a service for tonight. No telephones, no telegraph, nothing, just God speaking to them."
Wow.
That's amazing.
So he goes, he speaks there?
He goes, and they have dinner, and then he speaks. And at the end of the service, this is Duncan Campbell telling me that story 50-something years ago. He said, "At the end of the service, I was standing there with a deacon shaking hands with people in the church, and they were winding their way down the pathway toward the village. And he said, the deacon turned to me and said, 'Well, the Lord sure was good here tonight.' He said, yes, not thinking too much. He said, 'In fact, look.' And they looked and they saw the people falling over on the ground. And that was about 11 o'clock at night. They had a late service because of the sunrise up there, and in summertime. So, and the first one didn't get up till 4 o'clock the next morning with his hands toward heaven saying, 'Thank God I've broken through, I found reality.' And that was when they had that major revival that took place. And Donald Trump's mother was a niece to those old women.
Oh,
prayer meeting.
That's the relation.
So, yeah. And so they sent a Bible then to her in America. I think she got married in 36 to Fred Trump.
To Fred.
Yeah. And then, so, I mean, there's a lot to that story. But Duncan Campbell made a major impact on some of our lives back in those days. And I'll never forget it. Yeah.
Dang, I love that, man. I will never get tired of hearing the great stories of faith that build your faith.
Yeah. And so revival has been a major life message for me, that wherever I go, I want to see a spiritual awakening take place like we've heard about in history in our own country.
So in answer to my question, all these things that you're doing, whether it's with orphanages or the food for the poor or for clothing or for, there's a certain practical, I mean, Paul gathered the sticks in order to start a fire because everybody was wet from a shipwreck. There's a practical meeting of the most desperate human need that is totally a Christian. If Christian can do it, they do it. But you're doing it with the intent of seeing the kingdom of God manifest. Somehow, your seed is intending there's a door that will open.
Can I just really quickly? So, I was hungry and you fed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was in prison and you visited me. Before I became the CEO of Global Bridges, I was driving, okay? And all of a sudden, my car just fills with the presence of Jesus, just out of the blue. And I started weeping. And the Lord spoke to me. And I'm not going to name the country that he told me he was in, but he said, I'm in this country and I'm hungry. And it was a highly restricted country. And I'm just weeping. I'm just thinking, okay, Lord, I guess you're asking me to feed you in this country. Because it's, when you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me. Okay. My initial thought was, why can't you be on the beach in Hawaii? Why do you have to be in this country? And he is on the beach in Hawaii as well, okay? But he was saying, here I am, I'm here. I have physical needs in this country. I need you to come meet these physical needs. Now, I think it opens hearts when we show compassion, when we meet people's actual needs. It shows them, hey, there's tangible hope here. God cares about your needs. He cares about what you actually need. Not just, hey, we want you to kind of adopt a new philosophy. They've got to meet the living Christ, and they've got to see that he is practical.
Man, you believe in angels?
Oh, yeah, of course.
You guys said that kind of fast. Why?
We've felt their protection many times. Yeah.
My best friend, he grew up in Romania. He was born under Ceausescu, and his dad, before he was born, was not a believer. He had a dream one night. In his dream, he saw this little man with I think it was a cane or an umbrella, something, walking down the street. He wakes up, goes out his front door, and sees this little man who he had seen in the dream the night before. And so he said, that's weird. And he decided to follow him. Followed him right into an underground church meeting and gave his life to Christ. And God is always at work in these places. Yes, it's important to go and preach the gospel in word and in deed. But like Uncle Leland talks about, Francis of Assisi, what is it that you say that he said?
And sometimes with words.
Yeah. Preach the gospel at all times. Yeah.
But when necessary, use words. Yeah.
Yeah. But the thing is that God is always at work in these places. Yeah. And we're hearing a lot of stories about Muslims having dreams and Jesus, coming and appearing to them. I was talking to a lady a couple of weeks ago who was a Buddhist, and as she would meditate, Jesus would show up in her meditation. She would try to eject him. She'd try to say, "Oh, this is crazy. We can't have Jesus here." And she'd try to just tell Jesus to leave, and he wouldn't. And he kept coming back as she was meditating as a Buddhist. And she finally gave in and started reading the Bible and gave her life to Jesus. And so, God is sovereign, and he's bigger than we are, and he can do these things, and he does.
Is there something which you think people misunderstand about the missionary call? You've been Youth with a Mission. You guys are on the front lines. If there was one misconception that you think Americans have, what would it be? Either about the need that's out there or about the call of God?
Well, I think that a lot of people are wanting to get self-gratification and pursue things that's going to make them wealthy, and they're not so concerned over, they say, oh yeah, well, there's somebody that needs to do that, but not me, Right. So I think that's our country's been so successful economically that we've turned away, we've forgotten the God that's blessed us, like Abraham Lincoln said, And I think if there's a big need we have, it's to maybe go through some persecution ourselves as a nation in order to draw us back into the right values. Yeah. Yeah.
It's too bad. You guys remember Keith Green when he was hooking up with Lauren Cunningham's Youth with a Mission? Remember him at all?
Keith Green was a dear friend of ours, yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In fact, he just a few weeks before he died, he came to me and said, I feel I'm to submit myself to you and come under your flag. And so I said, well, let's pray about it. So I called Lauren Cunningham. We prayed together, and we felt it wasn't the time. After he got the plane crash, I'd made the last final flight that plane made.
Oh. Before it crashed.
And I was scheduled to go out the next morning with that plane. Our pilots were flying him for his concerts.
Oh.
He used the plane. We had the pilots. Yeah.
Oh.
So we were pretty close. Yeah. But anyway, that he took those people up and they all crashed. And that's I had some good conversations with his wife, and then
Melody,
we brought her into YWAM for a while to run some DTSs there.
Yeah.
And then.
Well, I remember his the influence that Youth with a Mission had on Keith was good, and I followed him kind of closely because we were the same age at that time. And I played piano; he played piano, so I was kind of like tracking with him, both from the.
Did you have an afro?
Yeah, I had crazy to imagine, but I had a mullet. It's crazy.
Wow.
But and I went and heard him preached in Lancaster, and so in Muddy Run for those Jesus festivals.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But I was really challenged by him when he started working with Youth with a Mission because I was in the business world. Remember that I'm listening to him.
Yeah.
And he says Jesus commands us to go, and his thrust was to go around the world doing his gospel worship sessions, preaching, whatever you call it. And to challenge people to be, and his theory is, if you're not called to stay, the premise is you're all called to go.
Yeah.
Go into all the world. And I thought, well, he was so radical. But it'd be like, unless you have a word from God to stay, you should assume you're called to go.
Exactly.
Because it's the reverse. Everyone has to have a word to go.
Yeah.
No, you have to have a word to stay. Otherwise, you're called to go.
Yeah. Well, Keith Green, you knew him pretty well, but he was flip-flop from everybody else. He would stay up all night and run his little printing shop and print his last day's newspaper,
Yeah.
And then he'd sleep all day. So at midnight one night, I had Don Stevens in my house. We were trying to get the Anastasis Mercy Ministry, Mercy Ships going. And so he was in my house, and about midnight, he banged on my door, said, God sent me over here to give you a word. So I introduced him to Don Stevens. And so Don invited him to come to Europe, and that's where he came back from that trip, visiting several missions bases there, and then started writing those songs that honed in on let's go. And then a couple months later, he died.
Wait, did Keith come with a word for you guys, or did you come?
He said he had a word of the Lord for
Well,
us.
what was the word? What did he say?
I don't know exactly what the word was, but he came in, so I introduced him. So we got talking about mercy ships, and so Don invited him to come over to visit some missions places there. So that's where it all.
I'll tell you what, I get upset, people. These young men, the devil wants to take them out. Bring that back up again. Global Bridges, what is it? Bridgesrelief.org. What are you sowing into when you sow into Global Bridges Relief? You're sowing into the work they're doing in the nations you're not allowed to go into. How's that? They can't say much more. My problem is I try to advertise meetings with organizations that can't tell people what they do, can't show pictures of who they're with, because it's behind the the virtual Iron Curtain or whatever's over there. But all right, so Leland, you have a job now. You've got to hurry up and get that book done. You've got Love Shines, Cultivating Divine Passion, Holy Purpose. You got. I'm telling you, when I sit with the generals, I get an impartation. I used to go hang out with an old-timer in his, be careful what I say, you're 87. He was in his 80s from the Salvation Army in Lancaster. Mm-hmm. And I used to go meet with him and his wife, and they knew way back when Samuel Logan Brengle in the Salvation Army, they remembered back to the William Booth days. I was going back to the early beginning. They said, well, Booth was a little ahead of us, but his predecessor, his successor, Samuel Logan Brengle. Oh, now there was a man of God. I said, what do you mean there was a man of God? Tell me stories. They said, well, for instance, we'd be in a meeting, and we'd be there, and Brengle would come in the back. And before he even got to the front, you felt the atmosphere start to shift. And something just came in the room, and you said, Brengle's here. And he'd walk right past you and go up and do the meeting. But you could tell he was coming. So I grabbed them as intercessors because at the time I was backslid. I was a teenager. I need prayer and intercession.
That's interesting. Wow.
118 meals have been delivered by you guys with your ministry. 700 plus orphans rescued. Thousands of indigenous leaders trained in persecuted countries where the gospel's illegal. Dear friends, listen to what I'm saying. You focus on the restricted nations. Last winter, 6,000 coats to keep kids from being sick in winter where they don't have heated schools, right? Mm-hmm. And tell me the economics one more time. About $100 in a church in America does what?
So $100 in your average church, given in the offering, $95 stays in the local church, about $4.50 goes to missions in countries that have already had the gospel, and 50 cents goes to the 1040 window where the gospel is in.
And what's the 1040 for my audience? 1040, we say it like we know. What's the 1040 window? 1040
window is where basically the gospel is forbidden.
And we're talking about from China to Korea to India to it's a very popular area. It's like 2 billion people there, and the gospel doesn't go.
Exactly. And that's
a lot of Arab countries, communist countries, and you can see the darkness there.
That's where the least amount of money goes as well. And that's where the most...
That's so weird, right? The least amount of money goes where it's the most dark and the most needed.
But it's because we can't talk about the details, and people can talk about what they just did in Mexico.
Yeah, and you could show crusade footage for your outreach somewhere in Brazil, but...
Yeah.
So, I want you to write down, grab a pen, people. Write down 888-488-3083. You want to talk to these men? Talk to Paul Snyder. Leland's working on his book. So, Paul, they're going to talk to you, and I want you to go to globalbridgesrelief.org, because this is the cry of the persecuted church. This is the cry of the pastors' wives who are arrested and are locked up in some of these countries. We can't get into the details because I'm not trying to get everybody in trouble here, but we're working behind enemy lines in order to get the gospel to go and the resources to get into these people. This is the church in the front lines. They're praying for someone like you right now to hear their voice. I'll never forget one of the women we know locked up in prison in one of those countries. She was freezing because they didn't give them proper protection during the winter. There's no heating in these concrete barracks. And even the guards were all bundled up outside, and they'd look in the window at the inmates. And as she sat there, she heard the voices of singing in America. She knew she could hear the prayers of people in America. She knew enough English to know they were praying for the persecuted church. And she heard the prayers of English-speaking people praying for the underground church. I don't even know if we have that anymore. She heard it. She said, Lance, as I heard it, I got hot. I got warm. Suddenly, sweat was coming off my forehead. It's like steam coming off my body. And the guards were looking in. What was going on? Because I had no clothing to protect me, but I was hot. And they were freezing. And they stared in disbelief because I was hearing the prayers. That's how she knew she had to come to America and meet with people, and she met with you. So these are his supernatural stories, folks. globalbridgesrelief.org. Put your deposit there. It's a new year, and as you have so many gifts given to you, give a gift to the kingdom of God and watch how God sends something to the unreached family members in your own house. Leland, thank you. Paul, thank you. And we'll have you back again with your book. So we'll see you again tomorrow.
Did you enjoy this latest episode? Please remember to share it with your friends, because the more knowledge you have, the better equipped you are to navigate the world